Hey, Reading Lens listener, Jason Banzoff here, producer for the Group Talk network of podcasts. I want to talk to you about a few things before we kick off this episode. We're going to be ending 2022 with some great Reading Lens episodes. And then in 2023, we got a treat for you. Reading Lens will become the Group Takeaways with Nick Lenzi. Nick has some great things lined up, so make sure you keep an eye out for the great things coming out in 2023. We can't wait to put these out. So until then, enjoy this Reading Lens classic. Welcome to Group Talk. 4 shows, 1 podcast from the Small Group Network focusing on topics relevant to small group ministries. Whether you're in a church of 100 or 10,000, whether you're a volunteer or staff, we want to support, encourage, and equip you to lead well. So relax, listen, and enjoy Reading Lens with Nick Lenzi.
Hey, Small Group Network. Welcome back to another episode of Reading Lens. We're so glad you chose the time to hang out with us. Here is how Reading Lens works. Each month I have with us a guest who's also a small group's point person to share with you insights from books we are reading, and what our takeaways were, and how we plan to incorporate them into our lives, leadership for our small groups. Today we have with us JW Hilliard, jumping on the podcast from Peachtree City in Georgia. Welcome, JW.
Thanks so much. It's good to be with you, Nick.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here. JW is a groups director at Southside Church, where he has held this role since 2017, which is funny enough the same year that we met. We first met at the lobby. And then we were able to reconnect, which is awesome because my church ended up joining the North Point Partnership, which is also your church is a part of as well. So shout out to the fabulous Tracy Atfield, who keeps us connected. And I've been trying to get her on for so long.
I think she'd probably do fabulously. I mean, she would do great. Yeah.
Yeah. And or get her and Cliff on, I think would be fantastic. Because every time I get to talk to them, there's just so much great wisdom that they have there.
No, that would be fun.
So, hey, what got you interested in small groups?
So honestly, it's exactly what we want for people. I was in my 20s. We just married and ended up in a church that I was fortunate enough in the early 2000s, we're doing small groups. And so I ended up in a small group and I just really kind of found a place of acceptance and belonging. And you know how that story goes, like you're in it for a little while. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, I think you seem to be pretty invested here. You have a home, you have a pulse. Maybe you should leave this small group. So I got kind of thrown into the deep end of hosting a group in our home, and then we led, and it was fantastic. Actually, that whole group experience. Not that it was perfect, but it really challenged me in my faith, and it really is why I have an adult faith now. So
yeah, that's awesome. And you live in Peachtree City. What do you love about Peachtree?
Okay, so I kind of live right around Peachtree City. But the funny thing about Peachtree City is it has 90 miles of golf cart trails. And
man.
Yeah, you can get literally anywhere in the city on a golf cart. And so, you'll go up to a fast food restaurant and there'll be golf cart hookups. And like the local high school, it has a full parking lot that is dedicated to golf carts. It's insane. And it's fun. It's just a great place to raise kids. So
that's fantastic. What's the best golf cart you've seen, or most creative?
There are some crazy ones. I mean, like pretty much everybody tricks them out. July 4th, there's this huge golf cart parade. I mean, the golf cart life here they do it hard.
That's amazing. JW is also a former blogger for the Small Group Network. Do you have a favorite blog that you wrote during that season?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just love being a part of the network and writing. It's kind of one of the things that I like to do. And but there was one that I felt like was helpful. A lot of times we need practical tools. There was one that I wrote on some apps that were really helpful to me as a groups director, and I think even would be helpful for some group leaders. But particularly as a groups director, it was very helpful for communication, for all that stuff. So that one was one that was helpful to me.
Yeah, I'm usually in that boat too, man. I'm always looking for I find the latest app, and then I'm like, gotta be something else better out there, because you always run into every app has their problems, right, or their downfalls, and you're like, man, I just wish this app and this app could come together. It'd be amazing. But yeah, that's pretty great. I'll have to link to that in the description for everyone. And then last question before we get started: what do you appreciate about the Small Group Network?
Man, I mean, just kind of keeping that blog theme, I think just the resources. I know early on, I've been doing groups for about 11 or 12 years now. And I remember whenever I first got into groups doing this kind of as a job, and I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I don't know that I really got it all figured out now. I don't, but I definitely didn't know what I was doing 12 years ago. And so having this repository of resources and people, I mean, people even being a resource, but having some of that content of people who just are a little further along than myself and could help guide the way. That was so helpful. I think still helpful. Like I'm looking at those resources all the time.
Yeah. I also think it's so great too. Like the resources are awesome, and people from all over the country and all over the world that are helping out to provide those resources, but they're also approachable. That's the thing that I just really have appreciated about Small Group Network too is, not only are they willing to share like, hey, here's how I arrived here, but it's like, hey, can you take a 10-minute call and I can ask you a couple more questions about this? And like, it's been rare that I've ever gotten turned down by someone.
Yeah. No, I mean, that is the thing. Like, a lot of these places, you see somebody writing something and you're like, oh, but here it's like, oh, actually their phone number is somewhere very accessible for me to get to.
Yeah. Or they're in that Facebook group that is just so easy to get in touch with.
No, the Facebook group is great. So
I do have to give our listeners a little warning today. I'm recording at the office, and our office is on a busy street. So you may hear some fire trucks and some backing up noise and other stereotypical city noises that you might hear. So, well, JW, you picked a great book for us to learn from today. Could you share a little bit about the book?
Sure. We're going to be talking about Made to Stick. And this is not necessarily a brand new book, but it is a fantastic book about communication. And so much of what we do is communication. So much of what our jobs are is influencing people through how we communicate. And so it's just been a really helpful book for me.
Yeah, same here. I picked this book up several years ago. I'll be honest. Usually I have our guest pick out the book, and I kind of nudged JW into this one a little bit more. He wanted to do another Chip and Dan Heath book, and I already had this one, but just hadn't had the chance to finish it. And so I did take a little bit of a shortcut, but I still think we ended up with a great book because, like you just said, all of us have to be communicating all the time. And this book does a really great job of sharing how can we take these ideas that we want to share with others and how can we, help those ideas stick. So this book outlines into 6 things that we need to do in order for our ideas to stick. And this is going to be our outline for today. So let me cover those 6, and then we're going to go into each one. So the 6 of the outline are simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. So if you were able to put this together in your mind, it actually spells out an acronym, which is success, and then they put like a little S because they don't have another S, but it works. I actually really appreciate that, even though it doesn't spell success, they didn't force a 7th one. I think I really appreciate that as this going along. So let's start with the first one, which is simple. So JW, what are the things that we need to know about making an idea simple?
If you have to say it in more than a few sentences, then it's probably not simple. If you aren't able to really kind of succinctly share the crux of the idea, then that's so complicated and so convoluted that people begin to fill in meaning whenever they don't necessarily know what to do. And there's this idea of commander's intent that they talked about. And I'm a former military guy, and commander's intent is just basically this idea of, hey, we're going to have a plan. We're going to get going. We've done our work. We've done our due diligence, but we know in the fog of war that plans break down. So what are we actually trying to accomplish? And I think that kind of helps us boil down to, even whenever we're making our plans and whenever we're doing our processes, not only how we end user communicate, but kind of like, what are we trying to accomplish here? What is this all about? If you're hosting an event or you're going through some curriculum or you're doing what are we actually hoping to accomplish in this time? That should be able to be boiled down into a sentence or two. And so I think that idea of what is the bottom line? What is the lead? If we're talking about like news articles. They have the lead. There's a hook that gets you invested into the story. And even if you weren't to read the entire article, you would get kind of the gist of the article from the lead. They talk about it in the book about it being an inverted triangle. I think that's a great picture. Like kind of the most important, the biggest chunk stuff is at the top, like that base of the triangle, because it's upside down, is at the top. And then it slowly works its way down to more of the minutia details. You know what? Which can be interesting. Like, in fact, sometimes those details can be super interesting. but maybe not super important.
Yeah, and I think finding the core is just super important too. I actually learned this principle a while ago from Bill Donahue. So Bill Donahue, I guess Dr. Bill Donahue. Dr. Bill Donahue. But what he was sharing with me is, he had these worksheets for trainings, and the first thing that you see at the top of the training was, all right, what is the one thing you want people from your training to walk away with? And it's been interesting to take that idea and that concept into, not just the trainings that I have, but, emails that I get sent out, any sort of message that I want to communicate is, what is that one thing I want them to know? And I think what's great about that is when you're able to identify what that is, I think then your communication throughout the rest of it is gonna anchor off of that one core concept. So it then helps you with yeses and nos of we need to include this in the training, or is this a distracting point and we need to take it away? So I think that's super helpful. I've also found it really beneficial for my community leaders, which you guys may call them coaches. We call them community leaders here. I love sharing that core message that we're going to share that at our next training. So when I said here's the one thing I want them to take away, that's what I'm going to share with my coaches, so that when they are meeting with their people, we do little breakouts in our training. They know okay, I want to hammer these kind of points home so that they leave here with this one concept in mind.
It's good. Kind of in that light, and even thinking about Dr. Bill's his training philosophy. We have a thing that we do here, basically where all of our jobs have a 1-sentence job description. And what I think is so awesome about that is it can get really, really easy to get yourself invested in a lot of things that are not part of what your core responsibilities are, because they're important. They're meaningful, and maybe they're meaningful to us. But I can get, at least myself, I can get so far off topic that anything can really fit into my job description. But whenever I go back to that 1 sentence, this is just the simplicity of what it is that I really was hired to do. It's what it is that I'm really here part of, that I think that just communicates to me, even to me, what I need to be about, what I need to be doing. And so, I think keeping those simple, sticky messages, simple, kind of core messages about what it is we're trying to accomplish is so important.
Yeah, I think it's that same concept that you just shared there. So the simplicity, what it helps with is it helps us with the yes and no's as we move further down this line of do we include this, do we not include this? So your 1-line description with job, should I action this or should I not action this? Is this my responsibility?
Yeah. Basically, my job is to invest in adult growth and connection at Southside.
That's awesome.
So when I'm not doing that, I'm not doing my job.
Yeah. Mine, I just boil it down. I wonder sometimes if mine's a little too broad. I just say help people belong. My whole core being I just want to help people belong. So how do I help them go from those rows and into circles is a big part of that. So,
but I mean, what's great about that is if you were spending a lot of time developing curriculum.
Yes. Oh yeah.
That's not necessarily core to that.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that empowerment. I'm going to bring that into my next career development meeting.
There you go. Awesome.
Get me out of content now.
Exactly. Well, I mean, sometimes we do things that are outside of our kind of primary role, but if you're spending, let's just say even 10 hours a week on that, that wouldn't necessarily fit into that belonging piece.
No, that's totally true. It's that's definitely the case. I'll say this alone. This chapter itself is worth the price of admission on this book. Cool. Well, let's move on to the next one. The next one is unexpected. So in the unexpected, we are looking to get our audience's attention through surprise. So we want to break the pattern. We all come in with these guessing machines, and we want to kind of break that and kind of give them a surprise. So this is interesting. One of the things that really helped me with the example they use in this book is from this college that there was a journalism course, and they each had to write a story on the same topic. And it was all designed to teach them about not burying the lead. So I realized we just talked about that in the simple part, but I think it really comes through here in the unexpected. And the example that they used was that all of the teachers were going to go to a conference this next week, and therefore there was going to be no school. Everyone who went to go write that story started writing about all the details of this conference. And, down in about 4 or 5 paragraphs, it was there'll be no school for the students. And I I don't think they put it that bluntly, if I remember from the example.
Yeah, no, I don't even think it was that explicit. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was just like, they're going to be there from these days kind of thing. And what this journalism professor taught was that, like, no, move the most important thing right to the start. And so he started with, there'll be no school next Thursday, because then that makes it makes all of us go, oh, no school next Thursday.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Like,
because this is a student paper, right? What's most important to the students?
So it's interesting when I read that. It was that night or that next day, I had to write an email and let all of our group leaders know that we have an issue at our church right now where all of our groups are at capacity, which is really surprising. It has more to do with us not having enough leaders, which you may relate to. But we've now had to start waiting lists for our groups, so that people, when people drop off of these rosters, they're able to get into these spots that are available. And so I had to reach out to our leaders, and I had to communicate a bunch of things of like, all right, what do we need them to do? And then what are we doing in a part of that? And so, like, I'm looking for the lead, and I ended up coming up with all the seats available for our evening women's groups are reserved. Like, and just starting with that as like, I needed it to be a celebration, but then I also needed to be able to cast vision from that. And so, like, trying to think of like, what is the most important thing in here, and can I put that right at the start to grab their attention, in hopefully somewhat of an unexpected way.
Yeah, I think what's beautiful about that is it's simple too. Like it's not convoluted. You get right to the point. We do a lot around here with story branding, and sometimes, and story branding's great. I think sometimes the thing that even like that this kind of spoke to me rereading this book again is that sometimes I get a little too almost like I want to like build this story. We'll talk about stories later, but I want to build this story, but I bury the lead in building the story because, we're kind of going on that hero's journey. Like we're going on we're trying to take him down a path. And so we have like this little template. Life's hard. We get it. We're here to help. If you read a lot of our messages, a lot of it kind of goes on that. But we can get so like into this formula that it's like, okay, but what are we actually trying? What is the important message here? So I think it's important in even how we do it. If we story brand properly, it's built in and it should be right at the top. But if we get too formulaic, we can be about the cuteness of the formula and not actually communicate what needs to be communicated. School's not open on Thursday.
Yep. Okay. So far we've done simple, and then it was unexpected. The next one, the third one, is concrete. So this is now going to help our ideas really give it that solid foundation. And one of the things that I think that is important for us to learn from this chapter that really stood out to me was using this concept of Velcro theory for memory. And so that probably doesn't sound very concrete, but if you've ever wondered how Velcro works, you have the one fuzzy side and then you have the one rough side. But if you look really closely on that rough side, they all have these little hooks. And so what ends up happening with Velcro is that you put the two together, and that little plastic side with the hook grabs onto that the soft side and sticks together. And so they wanted to help teach us this concept that the more hooks that we can give an idea, the better. And I thought that was a really great idea of like, when we start thinking of ideas, like what are the things, like how can we give people more things for them to hold on to? What was the example from this one that they...
Well, there were two examples that I had written down anyway. There's one of them that they named like the Mount Hamilton Wilderness. So like they're trying to create some land conservation in California because basically they find, I think it's like 7% or 11% their land is in significant risk of ecological damage. And like these are wetland shelters and things like that. And so they wanted to create a program to be able to keep those protected lands protected, but they couldn't afford to purchase all the land. So there was this one specific area right outside the Silicon Valley. It was kind of like the Brown Hills. They weren't interesting, it wasn't like Yosemite or any of these beautiful areas in California, but they were super, super important because they filtered a lot of the water and runoff kind of coming into the valley. And so, but they weren't really named. And So this group looked on the map, and the highest peak in the wilderness was called Mount Hamilton. So they coined it the Mount Hamilton Wilderness. And now that it had a name, it was actually something that could be put on somebody's radar. It was all of these people who wanted to begin to protect. There's a lot of people who are interested in conservation in the Silicon Valley. And now there was something nearby them that they could invest in. And so they started even seeing it themselves in literature. And it became a tangible entity that began to be protected instead of just somewhere for urban sprawl to continue to happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, thank you for filling in there. Yeah. So this spends a lot of time talking about how use more concrete things. So one of the things they were talking about too in this book was the difference between high performance, which can be vague and you can't determine, and a V8 engine, right?
Yeah.
So the V8 is something that's concrete, whereas high performance could be up to the person's discretion. So it's talking about using more things to sort of tie things down. So that's why the example of that mountain range and that place that they were trying to preserve, it actually gives it tangibility and allows it to stick better.
Yeah. Well, there's another example that I think that plays out in groups. Was they had the manufacturing example, and then they had the assemblers on the front lines actually trying to make sense of these drawings that the engineers had made. And so the assemblers come back to the engineers and tell them, hey, this part just doesn't fit. So the engineer, first thing that they do is they jump to the drawings and they begin to fix the drawings, and they begin to make the drawings right. And then they try to make more detailed drawings. And so they're getting more and more abstract. And so they're trying to explain to somebody who doesn't even really understand mechanical drawings how simple it is through a more abstract concept, when really that assembler is just wanting them to come down and show me where on this place that I'm supposed to put this part. And I think that for me, particularly with our group leaders, sometimes we give them abstract ideas. We talk about these ideas of community, and they really just want us to fix the part, or they really just want us to step into the situation that they're trying to solve. I actually have a real problem right now. Can you help me with this real problem?
Yeah.
Not the abstract idea of community.
Yeah, that's a really good connection there. And you just saying that also makes me think too, where I've seen this be successful or where groups kind of fail is hey, we want you to share your stories, right?
Right.
And I think when we give them more narrowed perspective on that, so one of the things I did with my own group that was super helpful was, hey, what I want you to do is share a difficult time that you had, and what was the Bible verse that helped get you through that period. And unknowingly, what I ended up doing by giving it that concreteness is I ended up having 8 preachers in my group, not actual preachers, but
right.
You would think these guys aren't usually great at sharing scripture and things like that, but then when they're able to tie that to a story and it be tangible, it was awesome to see how they were able to do that, because all right, I narrowed it down. And it's oh no, I've been through this, and here's the verse that I used in that season. So I think that might be a good way too. And or we say, hey, we want you guys to go hang out with your groups outside of group. I think sometimes you may need to give them more specifics as to what that might look like. I think sometimes if it's too broad, they'll sit there and chew on it too long, when it's just just pick a restaurant and go eat out together.
Right.
Something that gives it a little bit more concreteness. Go grab ice cream.
Yeah. So I think anytime that we can make it more concrete like that, here's exactly how you do it, I think we have much better engagement.
And then one other thing that we should include about this chapter that's super important. I don't know how this keeps happening in the books that we pick, but Saddleback keeps being in all of these examples. I think this is why Inside Saddleback is a great podcast that we have, or show here on the Group Talk podcast, because these are future ideas that are going to be in books that we read. But they talk about how helpful Saddleback Sam is. And for those who haven't read Purpose Driven Church, they talk about Saddleback Sam inside that. What's great about Saddleback Sam is that they were talking about how it helps their staff really think through the ideas as to whether this is going to be a good idea for the type of person who goes to their church. And they use this in a way to help their staff give more of those hooks. So this is a way that, if I think of everyone in Southern California, I'm going to think of a wide variety of people. But when you define Saddleback Sam, your person that you're trying to reach then becomes more concrete. So I think that was a really great example that they had in there too. So far, we have covered simple, unexpected, concrete, and we have 3 left, and the next one is credible. So in credible, we are helping people to believe. This is where the statistics are going to come in. So external credibility, what are the different sources that we have, and then internal credibility as well. And there's one story in here in particular that I would really love to highlight that I think is super helpful. And it was this peace group that was really trying to show to people the impact of how many nuclear weapons that we have in this world. And at the time, this was like in the 80s, so who knows what it is now. In the 80s, it was 5,000 nuclear warheads, which is enough to destroy the entire planet. And they wanted a symbolic way to show this. So they got a metal bucket and they just got BBs. And the person just started putting in one BB at a time. And every time that it would go in there, you'd hear like the tink of it hitting the side of this metal bucket that they had. And then she dumps in 5,000 BBs, and it just really brings it home of like, oh my gosh, that's so much. Because for most of us, when we think of like 5,000 warheads, like it doesn't really hit home to us per se. So I just love that. Like, this is a great example of I actually think this is a better example of why visuals are important in our trainings or in our communications, and making things more tangible. JW, do you have another example of this, of the visuals that stood out to you?
Yeah. So back in the 90s, there was a group, I think it was the CSCI, or it's a scientific group that looked at kind of public products and looked for areas where we could improve. And one thing that we found were that movie theater popcorn was really bad for you. Significantly bad. I think it was 37 grams of saturated fat per one medium-sized bag of movie theater popcorn.
But what is 37 grams?
What is 30 grams? Right. I mean, and you could say, well, USDA recommends that you have no more than 20 grams of saturated fat. But even that is like, okay, well, it's not that much more, right?
Yeah.
So they had this really creative idea where they lay out exactly what 37 grams or what is less than 37 grams. And it was started with breakfast, and it was eggs and bacon and just the full trimmings of a eggs and bacon breakfast. Then for lunch, it was a Big Mac and fries. And then for dinner, it was a steak dinner with all the trimmings. And they have this one shot before the press to say, like, this is how bad movie theater popcorn is for you.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, I like popcorn, but I would love a full day's meal like that.
Yeah.
Way more than movie theater popcorn. And that message just went viral. So it was on CNN, and it was on Fox, and it was on NBC. Mm-hmm. And the message got out that movie theater popcorn was not only bad for you, it was like really bad for you. And I think having that concrete, that tangible, that credible view, because here you have the statistics to back it up, but you have this pictorial evidence to share. And I think about if we're group leaders or we're groups directors and we communicate exactly how bad, we all have the statistics about how much community changes our lives, and how bad,
loneliness,
how much loneliness can cause just irreparable harm to our health. And worse than smoking, worse than all of these other vices. Man, what if we were to show some of those pictorial examples? What if we were just to display, okay, here's what eating what you want, and here's what a life of sedentariness, and here's what smoking 2 packs a day for the next 20 years. Go ahead and put it on a table. And you know what? Loneliness fits right on that table. I think that communicates something to me that maybe goes beyond just loneliness is bad for you.
Cool. All right. So let's hop on to number 5, which is emotional. Just to bring us back again, it was simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, and now we have emotional. When we talk about emotional, we're talking about making people care what we have to share. You guys are all group leaders, so I'm sure you've heard this before, but there's that wonderful phrase, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think this fits in here a lot. And they start with this really great example from Mother Teresa and a principle that she had in her own life, which was, if I look at one, I will act. So she talked about how, sometimes we can look and we can see how big a problem is. and we see the size of that problem and we're not really able to act, right? Or we kind of get stalled. But if we think about one, maybe it makes a difference. And so, a great example here is Hoboken has 60,000 people living in it, right? And if I think, oh man, we need to go out and impact 60,000 people, it's a lot harder for me to think about how am I going to do that than, okay, my neighbor Scott, how am I going to impact my neighbor Scott? So they talked about the power of, it's interesting, like that this isn't in story, but they talked about how nonprofits have really found a way to help people get connected to cause when they're able to tell one person's story as opposed to telling, the whole collective story. So they were sharing this is how World Hope and Compassion have stumbled on the importance of sponsoring a child as opposed to sponsoring World Hope and Compassion, and how when it's tangible and you have that one person that you're trying to impact, the difference that it makes.
Yeah, no, I think just having that name, it's a person that you're helping. You have the card, you have the ability to like put tangible handles on it. And I know that they shared in here, they shared about how much of a difference, like statistical difference, whenever they talked about you could help someone in Africa by helping feed them because they were in a need, and you could help a little girl with an actual name, and there was an actual need that you can meet for her. There was a statistical difference in how much they helped. So, yeah.
How do we take this concept? What does this concept look like inside our groups?
Well, I think that your Hoboken example is a good one. So, making it tangible to the individual.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So later on in this chapter, one of the other things I think is worth pulling out that we can use is they talked about this thing called the curse of knowledge, which is where we just start assuming that everyone else thinks the same way that we do. And I couldn't help reading this without thinking, like, man, does the church, like, we fall into this a lot, where that we assume that our leaders or we assume that our group members, know exactly what we're talking about or that they're passionate about the same things. They use this brilliant example of these, it's called the Defenders of Duo Piano. And it's going through this case and they're making their examples. And as they're going through it, like I fell right into the trap because they were talking about how duo piano isn't the same thing as dueling pianos. And I was like, oh man, they spent like 3 of my minutes like trying to talk to me about this case. And I totally thought it was something else, but it's this like actual instrument. So anyways, why am I telling this story? I think it's important when we think through what we're communicating is like, am I grabbing enough of their interest in order to help them understand this? Can I appeal to their self-interest? So the what's in it for me is really important for them to help people connect with ideas. And then appealing to their identity, I think is really important. There's a really good example in there too about how at one period in the 80s, Texas really struggled with litter. And this great campaign came out that was called Don't Mess with Texas, Texas Don't Litter. And they were able to grab actually famous Texans. They used some of the Cowboys and things like that, the Dallas Cowboys, to do their commercials. And they were talking about like if they had got Sylvester Stallone, who's macho but not Texan, like the message wouldn't connect. But they were able to like tap into that Texas pride in order for people to take pride in where they are. And they reduced litter in this one campaign by like 85%. So I have no idea whose job that is, by the way. That's got to be a bizarre one to like, oh, we've reduced litter like 85%.
I counted all the pieces of litter, and we're having 85% reduction. I mean, I think the thing about that example to me is, they talk about like we're all self-interested people, like, and we're appealing. This emotional idea is appealing to our own self-interest, but sometimes it's not really like we don't always make truly self-motivated decisions. A lot of times it's about the type of person I see myself as. So like that whole idea of a type of a Texan, like I'm a macho Texan, like I'm a macho guy because it was a certain group of Texans that were littering more, right? And so it's like, no, the type of guy like that, like I'm this person and someone like me acts this way. And so they got actual people who are representative of who they are. Like you said, it couldn't have been Arnold Schwarzenegger, And it's like, it's appealing to how they want to be perceived.
Yeah.
A person like me doesn't litter. And that changed. I mean, it was amazing. In fact, what was even more amazing to me about that example was that they had this whole enforcement policy that was going to come behind it.
Oh yeah.
After the ad campaign, and they didn't even need it. And so, I think about that, like, even appealing to our group leaders.
Yeah.
Like you can kind of appeal to group leaders as a group leader like me acts a certain way.
This is why it's important, I think, as well. I'm hearing you talk about this. So I see so many churches using stock photography, and it's people that don't even go to their church, right? And I feel like it's really hurting you when you're trying to get them into the community and they see people who don't even look like them, right? Or is clearly a home that doesn't exist where they are. Like, I think there's something special about showing something local and showing something that they can see themselves in, because you're appealing to what is them. And when everyone uses this one shot of like, there's a group of people sitting out on a pier, and then you see Lower Manhattan behind it. And I'm just like, you guys are in Topeka. Like, why are you using this photo? Like, I get that it's a beautiful picture of like young people and community, but like, there's got to be a better way that you guys connect to your audience. So I think that's a really good example of like tap into that as well. And I think this emotional thing ties in so easily into the last one, which is story. So last but not least is story. Mm-hmm. And I hope you already understand the power that is telling stories in our community. But what does this book say in particular of why stories are so effective?
Yeah, I think it gets people to act. Mm-hmm. Like stories move us to action.
Yeah, and I think some of the things it tries to teach us is why they're so important as well. So they talked about how stories as a simulation, and those tell people how to act. I think the thing is stories as simulation that really tracked my mind when it came to groups in our church is that are we able to sort of paint the picture well for a potential group member to see themselves attending group before they get there? I think that's one of the things I thought that was really interesting when I read through that, is like, we're just kind of expecting them to know what this is like and what they're going to experience. And I wonder if we can help them simulate that ahead of time as to what they're going to, how they're going to react. And so they use an example in there too of flight simulators and how important they play in that. Like, it helps people to practice before they get into the real thing. I don't know if that's VR groups, but there's got to be something out there that sort of helps communicate it. And a lot of that's just going to be through the stories that we tell, right? And not, maybe we don't leave out the details of like, so typical group looks like where I show up and I do this kind of thing. And it talks about like stories as inspiration. And I think this is one in the church that we're super good at. It uses Jared from Subway. I realized Jared has left a bad taste in people's mouths. I'm not going to talk about it, but just imagine this, how inspiring it is that a 425-pound person lost over 200 pounds by eating fast food. And so just talking about the element of surprise. And so it said, like, look for 3 key plot points when you tell stories. The first one is challenge, which is to overcome obstacles. Second one is connection, which is to get along or reconnect. And then the last one is creativity, to inspire a new way of thinking. So, hey, one last thing I want to do before we wrap up. I think it's important when it comes to stories. How do we capture stories? And I know you and I are fortunate at our churches to have these teams that record stories. So do you have any tips for our listeners if they don't have teams in order to capture stories?
Yeah, the new Apple. Have you seen the Apple commercials for the iPhone 13?
I know.
They're shooting like what looks like production quality videos. Like, I mean, it's like they're movies, and they're capturing on these phones. And like, I'm never going to be a director. I'm never going to like be doing some sort of movie production. However, I'm sitting around with this high-powered device to capture all kinds of things right in my pocket.
Yeah, and you don't even need an Apple, the latest one.
You don't even need an Apple. Like, like that's not the point. The point is, like, that was the unexpected point to me. It was like, hey, like here, they start off and it looks like they're filming a video, and then zooms back in. It's your phone. Well, I mean, just writing down notes. Like, I know whenever I was reading this book, all I did was I pulled out my note app and I started jotting down notes. But even like, maybe I'm leaving a one-on-one with the leader, and I make myself a voice memo, reminding myself of the story they just told me. Or maybe I say, hey, do you mind if I capture that? Can I get this voice memo from you? because it might be a little awkward to sit there if you're in a restaurant and you're having a conversation and let me film you. But hey, do you mind if I just like capture this on audio? Because how awesome would it be to have a very raw audio version of this awesome story to share at your next training?
Yeah, I think it's good too, because then if they do have to re-record it, it's great. But while it's fresh on their memory, I think it's super helpful. I can't remember who taught me that. It was someone in the small group network who was just telling me like capture those stories immediately, like while you have them present. And I started doing that. Yeah. It's just been super powerful. And what's great about it too is like, you may record it and it's not great quality, but it doesn't mean that you can't, translate it or turn it into a blog or turn it into some other medium to be able to communicate that out. And I feel like good stories, people forgive a lot when it comes to like the quality of things. Like they ultimately care about what that end result is. So, any other final thoughts on this book?
I think the thing that really sticks out to me is it doesn't matter who we're communicating to. If it's teams in our church, if it's our staffs, if it's our small group leaders, or just a general audience, the better we communicate, the more it actually sticks. Yeah. And the better that we kind of just refine our messages, the better we're going to be at doing our jobs, but also the better that our groups are going to be, because they're going to understand exactly what we're asking them to do. And so I would just encourage you, like, pick up the book. It's a fantastic resource. I think it feels like a ministry resource to me. It's
yes.
I know it's written for all audiences, but I feel like for church leaders in particular, it is such a great addition.
I would just say that I think the biggest thing I learned from this is just, can you boil down quickly what it is that you want them to take away, and then being able to focus on that. So I think so much of our trainings, I remember a few years ago at realizing like, I really need to stick to what's essential and not what's nice to have. So much of the time inside of my trainings, it's like, well, if you run into this issue, you should do this. If you run into this issue, you should do this. And getting away from like, all right, what's the essential or the principle I need to do? So I think that's a lot of thing of what this book kind of champions. Great. So, all right, let's finish this up with the lightning round. So what's another book that you've read recently that's had an impact on your leadership?
Sure. Another Chip and Dan Heath book that I haven't read it like really recently, but it's very impactful, is The Power of Moments. And it just talks about how these small moments, there's a story in there about hotel has a popsicle break. It's just an unexpected surprise and delight. And I think we can incorporate those into our church experiences where we unexpectedly surprise and delight people. We have people showing up at our churches every single week that feel very uncomfortable about even dawning the door of a church.
Yep.
And how can we create that experience to be scary, what could be scary and intimidating, and flip that script to making it, wow, man, I feel really cared for. I feel like they really wanted me there. So The Power of Moments is a great one for you.
Cool.
For church leaders.
And what's one you're looking forward to?
This is book Jesus and John Wayne. I'm really looking forward to hearing about it.
Had several people tell me I need to read this, so maybe this needs to be a future one that we have on here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm not coming in with a whole lot of preconceived notions, so we'll see.
And I guess we should say what's the book about?
Yeah, so it's just about kind of how white evangelicalism has embraced maybe some things that aren't necessarily what the gospel embraces. And so I think it probably will be a challenging book, because that's who I am. I am an evangelical. I've grown up in a suburban church. And I think sometimes we need those things that challenge us a little bit.
Yeah. Yep. And remember, like, I think one of the things too is like sometimes people are afraid to read things that are uncomfortable. Like you don't have to walk away with everything from it. Like it's okay to read things that you disagree with. Like being stretched is okay. So
I would go further to say, like, if we're not reading things that stretch us, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Like I think we need to be confident enough to come away with like, what do we actually believe, and like, not be not like just be blown by the wind.
Yeah.
But I think it's super important that we read things that challenge us.
Cool. Well, JW, I really enjoyed this. I'm Nick Lenzi, and I want to thank you for listening with us. Thank you, JW, for sharing your experiences.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed today's podcast.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, thanks. Come back next week for Steve and Derek as they give us behind-the-scenes look at what's going on at Saddleback on their show Inside Saddleback. Thanks for joining us. Remember, leaders are readers. Take care, everyone.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, great at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Group Talk. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast through iTunes and get new episodes downloaded automatically. Also, if you enjoy this program, please take a few minutes to give us a positive rating on iTunes so that other small group point people can find us more easily. We encourage you to visit our website at smallgroupnetwork.com to access our library of free resources, connect to a huddle with other small group ministry leaders in your area, read our blog articles, or join us on our Facebook group. Don't forget to use the hashtag SGNet when engaging with your social media channels. Thank you for your support.